Hello, BioB. Today we're going to talk about the nervous system. So if you were absent or you're just watching this will go pretty quick. Get in the 15 minutes. So there's a lot of information. So you may need to rewind it, pause it, come back. These are your main functions. Understanding that the nervous system is really your main control center. It coordinates functions throughout the body by taking in information all the time about what's happening inside and outside, which is the responding to stimuli, both internally and externally, to be able to then respond to those changes to keep you in homeostasis, keep you safe, respond. There are two main parts to the nervous system. We have your central nervous system, called your CNS, and then you have your peripheral nervous system, which is called your PNS. So the central nervous system, which is here in yellow, is made up of your brain and your spinal cord. This is the main part that processes information that's coming from the peripheral nervous system and then sending out messages back through the peripheral to react. It is the body's control center, and it really does a lot of that. So the main organ of the nervous system, obviously, is then the brain. And it's got three main parts. You have your cerebrum, your cerebellum, and your brainstem. Your cerebrum, which is kind of what you think of as the main part of the brain, is actually two hemispheres. This is where you have all your control of memory, intelligence. It's where you control your muscles, so a lot of your voluntary movements, stuff like that. The two hemispheres, people, there's been a lot of research that's been going on saying, one hemisphere is more artistic, one is more logical and mathematical, and people tend to lean on one more than the other, which is why people tend to be, one way or the other in terms of being more logical and mathematical or more artistic. But there's a lot of research out there about that. That they're still doing. And then back here you have this kind of mushroom looking thing, which is called your cerebellum. Your cerebellum is what controls all of your balance, your posture, and your coordination. This is why oftentimes if anyone takes a head injury to this part of the head, so the back of the skull back here, that it can lead to a lot of really long and extensive rehab for that person, because they have to learn they do damage to this part and have to really work and relearn all this balance and posture and coordination and stuff like that. And then you have your brainstem, which is essentially where the spinal cord connects into the brain, and it has a couple parts to it that if you take anatomy you'll learn about, like the medulla oblongata and the pons. And this is what really controls most of your involuntary activities, which are the things you don't really have to consciously think about and control. So like your breathing rate, your heart rate, stuff like that. If this part gets damaged, then you definitely will have issues and could die very easily, because if this gets damaged, then you could stop breathing and stuff like that. Again, tends to be from the back of the head that this injury takes place, which does major damage to these two parts, which play extensive roles in a lot of your involuntary things like breathing and stuff like that. Okay. So those just go a little more in depth if you want to pull them up, but you don't really need it so much for Bio B. All right, so now we're on to our peripheral. The peripheral is what's in green. This is all of the nerves that carry message to and from the central nervous system. So these, I tell kids, are kind of like all the telephone wires that go um, from the phone company back in the day. When you had more phones in your house, the central nervous system was kind of the switchboard, the people who received the calls, processed, and then you would call and say, oh, I want to talk to this person. They would connect you, which then would go back out to another part of the city or body in this case for them to then respond. The central nervous system the peripheral is very extensive. So what's the main basic unit of the nervous system? Those are called neurons. Neurons have this very unique shape to them. Okay, these are made this way to conduct impulses. They're made up of dendrites, a cell body, and an axon. The dendrites are this part that branch out. The cell body is this main part of the cell. So if you kind of sketch this and then put some kind of like hair-like fingers out, and then you have what's called the axon, which is this long kind of insulated piece that comes out and then branches down here. Now these are really important, the neurons, because the dendrites are the branch-like extensions that receive impulses and take them to the cell body. The axons then are the extension of the neuron that then carries the impulse away from the cell body, and your axons and your dendrites are what meet up. And this is what allows for you to have so many pathways throughout your body. So an axon, one of these terminals, would come and match up with one of the dendrite terminals. So then you could think of like an impulse coming down one axon, which is this way, and then it would jump from this nerve cell to this one, and then the cell body would direct it to go down and possibly branch this way to be carried down over to, like, let's say your left arm. Whereas here it might branch and then go, that's got to go to your right arm or down to your lower body, like your legs. And all these different branches in the dendrites and the axons and how they all meet up is what really allows it, like, for these impulses to go all over your body all the time. Kind of like how roads around a city can branch and go all over the place, to give you many different pathways to still get to the same spot. All right. There are really three types of neurons that make up what I call, and most people call, a reflex arc. So how does your body get information, process it, and then react? So you have what are called sensory neurons. These are the ones that come from your body. So you have sensory receptors all over your body, in your skin, in your blood vessels, all over, which are like little, they're sensors. They're picking up and just recording all this data and sending that information to your brain, to the central nervous system. Those are called sensory neurons. Any of the ones that take information from your body to your central nervous system, like your brain or your spinal cord. The interneurons are then the ones found in the brain and the spinal cord. These are the ones that really process the information. So the sensory neurons carry the information to your brain. Your brain is made of interneurons that then process all that information that they're getting and decide on how to respond. That is called a motor response. A motor response means a movement response, or what is the body going to do in response to the stimuli that your nervous system's picking up, all of these sensory neurons. So these motor neurons then carry the information from your brain or your spinal cord back out to the body parts to, say, tell a muscle to contract, or a sweat gland to start secreting sweat, or your eyelid to blink, or whatever it's going to tell you to do. That's how it does it. Okay, so you get this very simple reflex arc where, like, receptors in the skin sense something touching you. The sensory neurons take the information to your brain. The interneurons then process that information that, hey, someone's touching you. So then the interneurons are going to send a message out through the motor neurons to make a motor response to then tell some part of your body what to do to react to that stimuli. So in this case, the shoulder muscles might be activated, causing your head to turn to see who touched you. I give the kids the simple one of, you put your hand on something hot, the sensory neurons take information to your brain saying, hey, this is really warm. Your brain then processes it and says, oh, we need to pull our hand away. So it sends out a motor response down the motor neurons to the muscles of your arm to pull your hand away, to keep you from burning yourself anymore. And that's how that basically works. So in class we did a little lab. So this is a nerve impulse. Okay, a nerve impulse is essentially a small electrical impulse. You actually have small electrical charges that are taking place in your nerve cells. The interior of a neuron is always more negatively charged than the outside. So how does it do this? It does this because of, remember, those protein pumps that are all through cells across the membrane. So really this is a cell membrane, and you have all these channels all along it. So how do you make an impulse? It really has to come from pumping ions in and out of the nerve body or the nerve cell. So it starts as negative inside, and you have all these other ions of like sodium and potassium floating around, and sodium is positive. So what it does in a very simplified way for the purpose of this basic biology class is you have all these protein pumps, and when they get triggered, they're going to open up and all of this sodium is going to start flowing into here. So you're going to take all of these positive charges and be pumping them in here. Now, when that happens, what it does is it triggers the pumps next to it to also open up, and it creates kind of a domino effect of where all this sodium's getting pumped in, which creates an electrical impulse to shoot down the nerve. Now, it can't stay like this forever though, because now this is going to be more positive, and it's going to be, you're not going to have a difference of charge for the next impulse. So as soon as this is done pumping in and this kind of triggers the next one, then other protein pumps are triggered to then pump potassium, another positively charged ion, back out, returning the positive outside, negative inside difference in charges, so that the next time you need to do it, it can do it all over again. So the sodium kind of creates the impulse, the charge that gets sent because of the positive going in. The potassium getting pumped out kind of resets the nerve for the next one. And that's a very just simplistic, basic way to think of it. But you mainly need to know that it really comes down to pumping sodium in and potassium out to create these electrical charges. So what are myelin sheaths? Myelin sheath is like on the axon, remember? This part down here, you usually have these myelin sheaths. It's like the rubber coating on an electric cord that's going to keep the pulse or the impulse, the electrical charge, like electricity, going the direction you want. But it also speeds up the impulse because you have these little gaps in them. So what happens is the sodium flows in here, which causes this to trigger the pumps down here. So instead of having to do it all along here, it can kind of hop and skip down the nerve, which makes the transmission go way, way faster. So how does one impulse go from one nerve cell to the next? That's called a synapse. So a synapse is where the dendrites of one meet the axons of another. So like, how does one neuron pass the information to the next one? So that's called a synapse. And a synapse is essentially this little finger-like projection coming close to another one, and you have this little gap right here. And what happens is you have these things called neurotransmitters. A neurotransmitter is a chemical, so as the electrical impulse comes down like this, it's going to trigger this chemical, this little vesicle full of these chemicals, like think kind of like hormones, like we talked about, is going to go in here. It's going to be released into the synapse. Now, all these chemicals are going to go across and they're going to bind to these binding sites over here. And when they do that, it triggers the channels over here to open and pump a bunch of sodium in and create a new electrical impulse in the next neuron. Well, what most drugs, like when you go to the dentist and they give you the shot of like Novocaine to block the pain, is the Novocaine will go in and bind in all of these binding sites. So then when the message comes like this, the impulse that's saying, hey, this should hurt, and these neurotransmitters get released, they cannot bond or bind to the next one because they're being blocked. So then no electrical impulse ever makes it to your brain. So therefore you never really feel any pain. So the last thing we need to talk about is if every nerve impulse is the same, because there's this kind of all or none law, which says, hey, every electrical impulse has the same strength. So how does your brain interpret if something's hotter or if something hurts more? It's really about frequency. It's more about the frequency of it. So if your brain is getting hit with impulses like boom, 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 that's telling you it's really hot. If it just goes boom, boom, then it's telling you, oh, that's warm, or it's not hurting me as much. So the more impulses that your brain gets in like a short period of time, the more your brain's going to interpret that as being damaging or hurtful or really, really hot. So hopefully that helps. See you guys later.